It was really hard when the hospital got a hold of me and said, hey, can you do a doctor's orders on the early signs of dementia? And I was like, really? I've only spent 18 years studying it, and I'm not sure if I know all the early signs. So I'm hoping that by the end of today, we can talk a little bit about what dementia is, but then we can also maybe talk a little bit about one form of dementia that's a pretty common one that most people are concerned about when they come in to my clinic. Really quick, so that you know, in my profession, we're required to let everyone know where our money comes from. While I am medical staff here at Davis Hospital, they do not pay me for my services. I'm actually contracted with them. I have my own private clinic here in Layton, where I see patients, but I do come into the hospital and do evaluations for them when they need it. So let's hop right into it. What is dementia? Right? Because that's always the question that someone comes into me and asks, says, I think I have dementia. Well, that can be really hard because at times we think, well, if I'm struggling, if I can't remember where I put my flash drive, maybe I've got dementia, right? Fun experience I was sharing earlier, my dad called me about 6 months ago and he said, I think I have dementia. And I said, okay, what makes you think you have dementia? I was at work and I looked at my receptionist and I've known her for like 5-6 years and I couldn't remember her name. And I was like, okay, Dad, I just spent Saturday with you and you're fine. But he's like, no, I couldn't remember her name. It took me like 20 minutes to remember it. And I'm like, that's actually normal. Because if it was that you forgot a name, my mom probably had dementia when I was 10 because she called me by all 5 of my sister's names before she ever remembered my name. Right? And I love her to death, but let's be honest, there's moments that we sometimes forget a couple things. And that can be sometimes very, very scary. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we're really having the problems we think we have. So I'm hoping as we kind of go through and talk about what really is dementia and those type of things, you'll maybe be able to better understand some of the things that, at least for myself as a clinician, I'm more concerned about. So like it says, it's a general term that just means that, hey, our brain's slowing down, it's starting to have problems. And the big issue isn't that it slows down, because with age that happens. By the time you're 24, 25, your brain is at its peak capacity. That's all that you're going to be able to fully do. Now I know some of you with 24-year-old kids are like, really? I was kind of hoping for more, right? But the reality is, at least in the development of our brain, how it wires itself together right about the age of 25 is about where it tops out. So you may learn to understand rocket science, but you're not going to be a rocket scientist at 60. It just doesn't work that way. So as we start slowing down, that's normal. Where we get concerned is when you start slowing down outside of what we expect for individuals your age. If you look at the current research, about 10% of our cognitive ability by the age of 70 is gone. That doesn't mean we have dementia. That means that we're getting older, that we've used our brains really well. I want you to remember that number, because sometimes we think if I forgot even the slightest thing, if I wasn't like I was at 20, something's wrong. And I'm like, yeah, you're not 20 anymore. But that doesn't mean necessarily that anything's going on in your brain. Oftentimes you'll hear some terms that are kind of hard to hear. I've never liked hearing them in my profession when people come in and say, I've been told I'm senile. And I'm like, well, here's the thing. Senile, at least the clinical definition, actually means problems with your personality and emotional regulation. Now, do we see that sometimes with dementia? We do. But it's usually not because of the dementia that people are having that problem. It's usually because their family members are in their face pushing you to try to remember something that you can't. And it starts becoming agitating. And it starts causing problems. They go, oh, mom or dad must be senile. Or you're just harassing them and you need to back off. And so I always am really cautious about not using that term, because it's not really a fair term for what the true situation is. To diagnose dementia, the big thing that we look at are a couple things. We're looking at really how your brain's changing. And to do it, you have to have a couple different issues going on. The first and foremost is you have to have a significant change in your memory ability. So If you're having a hard time remembering something, chances are there's a problem, because that's a pretty in-depth, ingrained ability throughout our brain. It doesn't just store in one little section, it's kind of stored all over. So if someone comes in and we're really seeing memory problems, that's usually a good sign that we're probably going to see some other problems. But to be diagnosed with a form of dementia, you have to have something else too. So either you're having problems finding words. Now, like my mom, if you forget who your child is for 20 minutes, that's probably a blessing, not necessarily a problem. Okay? But if you're noticing it's happening even in general talk, then all of a sudden something else might be going on. Clinically, we call that tangential speak, just meaning that people will talk in circles to try to cover what they think you want them to share. So I might ask someone a question like, how was your day? And they will tell me the longest story about their life until they can think of the words to describe their day. Or they will start telling me something that you know for a matter of fact is not possible. And that's what we call confabulation. It's the brain's way of trying to make sense of something it doesn't understand. Kids are very good at it, right? Especially the younger they are, we call it their imagination. But the brain does the same thing when we're older. I know something happened, I'm just not sure what it is, so I think it was this. And your whole family's behind you going, it's nothing like that whatsoever. And that's what we call confabulation. So the big issue to understand about dementia is that what it is it's changes or damage in brain cells. And I love this picture because all of those are Alzheimer's pictures, which tells us that dementia isn't just a one localization type of impairment in the brain, that it can cover a lot of different areas. So when I have people come in and they're like, well, my uncle was like this and I think I'm like that. Yeah, you might be, but you may not be. It may be something completely different. Okay? And like it says, it damages, the damage interferes with the ability of the brain cells to communicate with each other. And that's really what's happening. It's not that the information isn't there. It's that I can't pull it up correctly anymore. And that's usually where you see that anxiety come with individuals that do have dementia, is that they know, they just don't know why they can't tell you that what they know, but it's there. And that's why sometimes you'll see them, one day they'll know who you are, and the next day they won't know who you are, and then the next day they'll know more about you than you wish they could remember. And then it'll turn around the next day and they won't remember again. And that's because of that damage within how the brain works. It doesn't fire the same way anymore. So, how do we diagnose dementia? This is why I came back to Utah. Not just because I love my family and my wife wanted to come home and my mom made it very clear that she was homesick for her grandchildren and my wife and that I could come too, right? But I came back because in reality, the population isn't served very well in Utah. It was a problem I had before I went to grad school. I was always concerned who was available in the community and how individuals were being treated. Because what I've found since I've been back is a lot of individuals will come in and see me and they'll be like, my doctor said I had dementia. And then he walked out and told me to set up a new appointment. And I just sat there looking at him like, what? I'm not even sure how I'm supposed to respond to something like that. And it's not to pick on doctors, because I think medical doctors oftentimes can see what's going on. The problem is that's not really their area of expertise. They can look and go, hey, Joe, you're having a problem with your memory. I think you're having dementia. But there's a lot of reasons Joe could be having problems with his memory. And so my belief is that simply telling someone that you have dementia is not sufficient. That is not fair to someone. And I'm going to show you why in the next slide. But the way I go about it, the way we do it in my clinic, is that if you come in and we're concerned that there's a memory or a dementia issue going on, we always start with a thorough physical, not a, well, I kind of went in because I needed my booster for flu this year. That's not a physical. That's getting a booster for a flu. And I find it interesting, and yes, men are worse at this than women, but they will come into my clinic and be like, when was your last physical? Well, let's see, I retired 20 years ago, so 20 years ago. And I'm like, okay, that's not a good place to start. So we always get a full, complete physical so that we can rule out any anatomical issues. And with that, we get a complete blood panel done, which means we find out your vitamin D, your B12, your thyroid. For men, your testosterone. For women, your estrogen levels. And I'm going to explain why estrogen in a minute, because I'm lucky enough for what I do that I get to work a lot with the Alzheimer's Association. How many of you knew there's an Alzheimer's Association in Utah? So not very many. How many of you know of those that raised their hand that you don't have to have Alzheimer's to get help from them? They actually specialize in any cognitive impairment that you have. So whether it be mild and just early stages of some problems all the way up to any form of dementia, they're the leading experts in studying that. I actually met with them the other day. We were talking about some research that they do. And what was interesting about the Alzheimer's Association is the National Institutes of Health are the top leading people that spend money on research. Then it's China. I'm not sure how that one works. And then number 3 is the Alzheimer's Association, worldwide. That's how much money they invest in trying to figure out problems with the brain, right? And so people will come in, we'll do that thorough physical. Then we'll try to decide, do we need to do some neuroimaging? Now that could be an MRI or a CAT scan or an EEG. It really kind of depends on what I think's going on, what we think's going on as a team, and what we're trying to find out. Because CAT scans don't show everything. And honestly, MRIs don't show everything either. Usually if we're ordering it, it's for a very, very specific reason, either in the way that your brain's working or changes that we're looking for. Okay? Then we do formal testing. Now, I was sharing that this morning I did some testing on a gentleman that we believe might have some dementia. So I started at 7 o'clock this morning with him. And that's why I came running in a little bit late, because he took a little bit longer than we had planned. But it's about 5 hours worth of testing, because to really fully appreciate what's going on, we have to fully know how your brain works. Because it's not just fair enough to turn, like I said, and go, oh, your memory doesn't work, sorry. That's not fair for my patients, it's not fair for their families. And then the very last one, the one that we do that's very unique to our clinic, is that we do follow-ups frequently. So let's say that someone comes in and we diagnose them with dementia. They actually spend the rest of their life seeing me at least every 3 months. And that's so that we can track how things are going, make sure that things are being treated correctly, and to make sure that they have support and that their loved ones have support also. And that's really an important piece that we haven't done really well in the profession. We haven't been good at helping people appreciate what's really going on and making those decisions. And the kind of our work theory at my clinic is that our goal is to help everyone keep their independence as long as they can and their individual dignity as long as they can. And the only way I can do that is if we see them on a regular basis. Also, it's not fair if I hand someone a 30-page report with a bunch of recommendations on and say, well, good luck. Try to figure out who you're going to talk to. I'd much rather be involved and actually help you find out who you need to meet with. So here's why when they asked me to talk about early signs of dementia, I was like, bam, that's not easy, because these are all the different types of dementia. Do you see why there might be a problem if your doctor just says, I think you have dementia? Some of you may have heard of some of them. Some of them you may not have.
Alzheimer's isn't on the list.
Yeah, it's because I'm going to mess this up, watch. He's right there, right? And I put him right there for a reason. And we're going to talk about Alzheimer's, because Alzheimer's equals about 60 to 80% of all the major dementia that we actually experience or that we see coming across when we start having serious memory problems, okay? Now I'm going to blow your mind a little bit further. Those are all the potential causes. Now, some of them are progressive, like Alzheimer's, vascular, Lewy bodies, frontal. Those are things that we call neurodegenerative, which means that if you get it, we kind of know what the pattern's going to look like, and what we do is we work to slow it down. But there's other things that are linked to getting dementia, and there's even more to that because we have some genetic issues. But then we have all of these, what we call dementia-like conditions. And that's where I think it becomes really, really important. As I kind of sat back and thought about how to share with you guys, I'm like, I really don't want everyone going home and thinking they can diagnose themselves, because that doesn't turn out super good. I used to do that as a kid and made my mom really upset, because she's a nurse, and she's like, if you just come, we wouldn't be going to the ER right now. But I thought I had it fixed, right? And so some of these are really important. For example, in infections and disorders, if you get a severe UTI over the age of 60, you will look like you have dementia. It doesn't necessarily mean that you do. But if you don't take care of it, it can lead to dementia. I see that a lot in nursing homes that I consult with, and I've seen them in patient also. Nutritional deficiencies. Let's just be honest, the older we get, the more we just kind of don't eat like we should. Now, I'm not saying you eat as bad as a grad student. I ate pretty bad, right? But sometimes we may not remember to eat, or we may not eat the best meals with the right vitamins in them. And we'll actually see people start having memory issues, and all these can potentially be reversed. So here's some of the early signs. This is what research shows us right now, are those early signs that we're seeing. And I want you to read the very first one, because this is the key important part to understand about when we're looking at dementia. It's not that you're having a memory problem. It's that you're having a memory problem that's disrupting your life. If I forget my son's name, okay, maybe not good, maybe makes him a little upset. But if I forget where I live and I can't get home all of a sudden, that's a serious issue, especially if I've been living there for the last 30 years. Okay? Challenges in planning and solving problems. Like when your kids walk in and go, Mom, I just got a phone call from the bank. You're overdrawn by a couple $1,000s. And you're like, oh, I've been doing the checkbook. And it doesn't look like math that's in your checkbook. That's usually a good sign something's going on. Difficulty completing familiar tasks at home. And this doesn't mean physical ailments that are keeping you from being able to care for your home. This is the inability to remember how to do it. I started cooking and I walked away and I forgot about it until the fire alarm went off. That's a problem. I started filling the tub because I was going to soak. And then I walked in and it was all over the floor. That's a problem. Those are the type of things that we talk about when we get concerned, okay? Confusion with time or place. Now, if it's just a couple minutes or a couple hours, I'm not usually too concerned. But like the young lady that came and saw me that told me that it was 1937, that's a little bit more concerning, especially since she's still working full-time. Okay? Trouble understanding visual images or spatial relations. Now that's a really deep one. This is why this is important. How many of you still drive? Everyone raises their hand. The number one thing people don't like me about when they come to my clinic is when I have to tell them you can't drive anymore. But what's funny is when I start talking to them about how they're using visual information, like, how often do you get in a wreck? And I'll see, especially men, go, oh, I don't do it that often. And their wives will look at them like, I'm not right with you anymore because you scare me so bad. And that's usually a pretty good sign that there's a change happening in your brain. New problems with words in speaking or writing. Okay, that's again where we were talking about making up like huge words, things that you don't usually have a problem with. Like I have a gentleman that saw me yesterday that walks in and he told his wife he had celery for breakfast, which was awesome, except she doesn't like celery, so she doesn't buy it. And what we found out he was eating is that he had found her Twizzler stash and had been taking it and going to work with it. And that was celery to him. And he was like, nope, that's the celery. And he was dead set that that was the celery until we explained that's the Twizzlers. Well, yeah, that's what I was saying. we're like, no, that's not what you're saying. Now here's the one I'm always careful about. Misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace your steps, okay? This might be like a developmental issue because my kids never seem to remember either, right? But there's very difference, and I always set them in the same place. Where I get concerned is if you don't know where you put it, but then you do find it, but you know that your phone didn't belong in your microwave. That's usually a pretty good sign that we're having problems. Decreased or poor judgment. Now this is really concerning for me. We don't often see this when individuals first come in, but this is something I talk to their loved ones about. We know that individuals who start having memory problems are at a higher chance of being taken advantage of financially because they don't know. And the person seemed nice. And I don't think they'd lie to me until their entire savings is gone. And that's not easy to get back. When I start seeing people withdraw from what they normally do, and they're not doing it necessarily because of mood, but because they kind of know that they're struggling interacting with people. So they just kind of choose not to go out. Hold on, we always went out Friday night with John and Susie. Yeah, I just don't feel like it anymore. Okay, that's usually a sign that something's going on. But let's be honest, we're kind of prideful individuals. We don't want to admit that something's not good. Oh, it's been a long day. I use that sometimes, I won't lie. And then changes in mood and personality. And this is a hard one because mood and personality, there's a disorder that's called pseudo-dementia. And it's really important that you know the difference, at least that I know the difference, because you can come in and actually be so severely depressed, that you look like you have dementia, but you don't. And the minute we treat the depression, everything else comes back. But if I don't know what I'm looking for, I just think that you have dementia. And putting you on dementia meds doesn't make you less depressed. So it's really, really important that we have people that understand that difference. So I want to talk about the main one that I often hear, and this is Alzheimer's, okay? And my goal when doing this wasn't to make everyone like leave and go, oh man, I don't want to come back anymore, because that's not the goal here. But I want everyone to appreciate what the research is showing us, because I love the research. About every 5 years, we learn so much more about the brain than we ever knew. And then everything we thought we knew, we found out we were kind of wrong about, which is an important thing to appreciate. You know, I listened to Kaylin get up here and talk about all these great things I did. I went, yeah, all those things were awesome, and everything I learned there, I've learned something completely different about over the last few years, because we've learned so much. So here's what we know currently. This is what the Alzheimer's Association has shared. Alzheimer's is the only cause of death in the top 10 in America that cannot be prevented, cured, or slowed. I take issue with the slowed one. We can slow it down a little bit, but we can't slow it down to where it doesn't happen. But there's a lot of things you can do to proactively protect some of those changes.
Is that with drugs?
No, drugs are part of it. And we'll talk about drugs and why there's a problem with drugs. I'm not anti-drug, but we have to appreciate what we're doing with that drug, okay? Almost 2/3 of Americans with Alzheimer's disease are women. Now this is interesting because usually family members don't know mom's having a problem because dads have a tendency to get physically ill first. So everyone takes care of dad until maybe dad passes away. Then everyone turns and goes, hey, has anyone ever noticed that mom's kind of struggling? She's been so busy taking care of dad, we didn't even think about it. 1 in 3 seniors dies of Alzheimer's or another dementia. Now here's the hard thing about this. Of that 1/3, not all of it should happen, if that makes sense. Yeah, we've got the ones that we can't do anything about, but a vast majority of the dementia we see are because of other issues. They got an infection. They decided they'd take care of it themselves. All of a sudden it's climbed up their leg and turned into sepsis. And now they've got a bigger problem. And then they get dementia. It's like if we had taken care of the sore, if we had taken care of the injury, it wouldn't have become septic, it wouldn't have gotten in your blood, we wouldn't have had this problem. That's why it's so important for me, this topic. Alzheimer's disease is the 6th leading cause of death in the United States. And it's the one we spend the least amount of money on trying to figure out what's going on. It goes on talking about caregivers, about how much it costs the United States to care for. I like that number. It'll cost the nation $226 billion last year. We're already in a new year. Now, here's why. Like I said, Alzheimer's is roughly 60 to 80% of all the dementias that we know of. It's the one that I see most often in my clinic. Every 67 seconds, someone develops the disease. Problem is, they're not diagnosed that often. We know it's happening, and when we go back and look, we can see that they've had it, but then we look back and there's no record of them ever seeing anyone. We're like, could we have maybe helped them? Could we have provided something else? An estimated 5.3 million Americans of all ages, and I like that, all ages. It's something I want y'all to appreciate. Alzheimer's disease is not a quote-unquote old person's disease. I've seen people as young as 40 with it. And it's a pretty serious issue. And that's why I always get concerned when people don't come in. And it goes on, and like I said, I don't want to make life horrible with all these horrible numbers, but I want us to appreciate it. I do want to talk a little bit about some myths, because I get these phone calls once in a while. I got a question, don't want to come see you, but I heard. Okay, so let's cover some of the top 10 myths that we know. Number 1, memory loss is a natural part of aging. That's actually not true. If I look at most 90-year-olds and test them, they keep almost all of their cognitive abilities they've had their whole life. There'll be some slowing, but that's age-related. But when someone starts having memory problems, that is not normal. Alzheimer's disease is not fatal. I wish I could give a better answer than that, but the truth is it is. It's not a fun disease. That's why I'm so passionate about following families through the process so that they get the support they need, the answers, and everything else. Only older people can get Alzheimer's. I kind of already discussed that. This was my fun one. Drinking out of aluminum cans or cooking with aluminum pots are going to give you Alzheimer's. It's not. There's absolutely no proof for it whatsoever. Aspartame, our favorite non-sugar addition, is going to give us Alzheimer's. There's no research for that. Flu shots increase risk of Alzheimer's disease. That is not true. What I can tell you, however, is if you get the flu and you have Alzheimer's, it makes the situation much worse for us because the brain does not like infections. I'm not sure where this one came from. Please don't go home and rip out your fillings. You can keep them, okay? There's no proof that silver or gold or any other version of filling in your teeth are going to increase your chances of getting Alzheimer's. And there are treatments available to stop the progression of Alzheimer's disease. There aren't. There's ways we can kind of slow it a little bit, and there's things that we can do to help you. But when it's there, our goal is to try, like I said, to give you as much dignity as possible and help you deal with that disease in a way that helps you and your family. There's one other myth that I want to add, and this is a new one that's come up because I get a lot of questions about it, and this isn't to beat up on anyone that's into natural remedies. Currently, there is no research to support that coconut oil is an answer to cure Alzheimer's. Now, I'm not saying don't go use it. I know people have said, well, it helped, and I'm like, awesome. But I've seen some really, really difficult situations where people have held down their loved ones and forced it down their throat thinking it's going to help. And again, I think that's against the dignity of the individual. That's when I spend more time with the family talking about their need to grieve over really fixing a problem. So I'm not saying don't go take your coconut oil or whatever else you have, but let's appreciate what we're really trying to achieve here. Prevention. So this is the one that everyone always asks me about. Well, how can I keep myself from getting it? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't really have a lot of good answers. I can tell you what will speed up the process, right? For example, the things we know you can't change. Your age. The older you get, the better chance you get of having dementia. Your family history. If a lot of people in your family have a history of dementia, chances are you have a pretty good chance of getting it. And then genetic mutations. Some of the newest research, some of the coolest research that we have is that we have found currently in a genome study, so looking at genetics, 11 unique genetic traits that they're able to map now that they're seeing that are pretty common across Alzheimer's disease. Now, we don't know what to do with it yet, but it's interesting that we're able to actually go in and start seeing this. And that's where the research is moving in hopes that maybe we can do something more preventative. The other one is Down syndrome. That's one that I often see come in. Probably the highest propensity for Alzheimer's or a form of dementia is if you were born with a Down syndrome disorder. And it's just because you're born and your brain's already pretty compromised. And because of that, they have a better chance. Now, here are the things you can do. Now, I'm not going to tell you if you're supposed to drink or not. That's a decision you get to make as an adult. However, getting plastered on a regular basis is not a good idea, regardless of your age. Okay? It's just not good for your brain. Watching your cholesterol is really important. Again, these people that come in and say, well, I've not really been to a doctor for 20 years because life's going pretty good. Doesn't mean life's going good, just means that you haven't had a major problem yet. Controlling your blood pressure is important. Depression. And the reason depression is important to us is because while there's pseudo-dementia like I talked about, there's also, if I have depression and I have dementia and I do nothing about it, I actually speed up the progression of it. Because I just stop living, I stop trying, I stop caring. And the brain's like, awesome, then I'm going to stop trying also. High estrogen levels, I shared this one earlier. So recent research has shown that women who have been through menopause or had a hysterectomy that are on estrogen levels, if you do not have them checked on a regular basis and your estrogen levels get too high, it more than triples your chance of getting a form of dementia. So all of you that might be taking it that haven't had your physicals, that's why I get full blood panels done on individuals, because I want to know exactly what's going on in the body. Because if I can taper off your estrogen level and maybe clear up a lot of your cognitive issues, I would much rather do that and say, yay, this wasn't the type of dementia I was worried about. Obesity and smoking. Now, a lot of these are important, not so much because of Alzheimer's disease, but we also have what's called ischemic or vascular dementia, which is where you have mini strokes that take out portions of your brain that you don't get back. And what we're starting to see more often now is that I'm having people come in with what we call dementia multiple etiologies, meaning that they have Alzheimer's, but then they're severely obese and they're having strokes and they're actually complicating the situation. And I'm like, all you've done is sped up the process 10 times faster. So the healthier we live, the safer it is for us. So being proactive, and this is a discussion, it doesn't matter if you come into my clinic and I think you have dementia, or if I don't think you have dementia, we still have this discussion. And so that you know, I only practice evidence-based treatments. That's why I don't really talk about coconut oil in my clinic, because there's no research to support it, and I'd rather focus on what I know the research says right now. So here's what the research tells us about healthy lifestyle choices. So we already talked about the weight and the alcohol and the smoking and that. One thing that we have found that seems to at least help hinder the chances of getting a dementia is to use the Mediterranean diet lifestyle. Now, it doesn't mean you shouldn't have a cheeseburger, but they have been able to show that individuals that eat less red meat and eat a healthier fruit, fish, and kind of a nut diet have a lower chance of getting Alzheimer's disease. We're not really sure why. Everyone's still looking into why exactly that's occurring. But we know that there's a lower propensity of individuals that are having those type of problems. Exercising. Now we all go, oh, we get to that age where it hurts, and yeah, it does. And go to a water aerobics class, do something. Current research is showing 2 to 3 times a day for at least half an hour are sufficient. Now that isn't sufficient to stay healthy. I don't want like the nutritionist chasing me down the hallway and beating on me later, because I know what the research says about staying healthy. But what research shows me and what I've been able to find with individuals with dementia is that by exercising, we're able to slowly kind of taper off the progression of Alzheimer's disease, because we're causing the blood to circulate better, which means we're getting more oxygen. Please.
You say 2 or 3 times a day?
I'm sorry, 2 or 3, well, you can. I don't. I wish, my wife wishes I did. 2 or 3 times a week, I'm sorry, okay?
I lost my breath.
No, you're good. But hey, if you do and it works, let's talk. We'll write a paper together, we'll get famous. Staying socially active. This is one of the biggest issues we see as we kind of get older, is that individuals are like, I just kind of like being at home. And the reality is it's not bad wanting to be at home, but we have been able to prove that the more socially active you stay, the more you keep your wiring in your brain intact. Because when we think that the correlation there is that in those conversations, especially with individuals, usually our age, we can challenge each other and we have to think about things, and so it reinforces those connections that we have. Staying cognitively active, and I have to be careful on this one, okay? Sudoku is awesome. I love Sudoku. Puzzles are awesome. Those type of things are awesome. I do not support any of the ones you've ever heard on TV or from AARP or anyone else, okay? And that's not that I don't like them, but the research hasn't been very validating on them. There's one currently that's in the process of getting sued by the federal government for some claims they made that everyone in my profession was sitting back going, that's funny because your research doesn't add up to what we know. And we've been kind of arguing about it for the last couple years, and then it just broke about 3 months ago that that company was getting sued for their claims. That doesn't mean that what they were doing was bad. Anything we do to challenge the brain is good. But I'm always cautious that people think they've found the magic teapot that's going to fix all the problems. So anything you can do, even if it's you steal your grandchild's, well, I guess everything's on phones now, right? No one has a Game Boy but their phone, and try to play whatever game they're trying to figure out. That's actually a good thing. Angry Birds, great one to play. It'll make you angry while you're playing it, but it's kind of fun because you got to think visual spatial on how to get the thing to launch. Staying healthy. This is my biggest proponent when you come into my clinic. This is the hardest thing I have with individuals. If you think you have a UTI, go to the doctor. Because if it becomes bad, we've got bigger issues. If you get a sore on your leg, you got to go to the doctor. Because if it doesn't clear up, it goes to the blood and goes to your brain. Now, individuals with dementia, I make it mandatory. They actually have to sign an agreement with me in my clinic that they will follow through with that. Because if you don't, you can actually cause bigger issues with what's going on with your brain. Had another young lady, everyone that comes to my clinic's young, that's how I see it. I'm 73 years old. She took care of her husband while he passed away from prostate cancer, and then the family came in and went, I think something's wrong with mom. So they brought her in to see me, and she has Alzheimer's. The problem is that her biggest issue wasn't her Alzheimer's. As I started talking to her and we started checking her ankles and stuff, she had a sore on her leg that had started out, they think was a little bite, except now it was the size of a quarter. And it had actually grown up the side of her leg in the infection. So she got to spend 3 weeks at the hospital on massive antibiotics. So now the family's asking me, what's going on with her? How bad's her Alzheimer's? I'm like, I don't know, because she had this infection, and I can't promise you what part was what and what's caused what. I know where she is now, and I know what we can do from here forward. Now, the neat thing about her is that a lot of her abilities came back. I mean, she still had Alzheimer's, but she was doing okay. And because her husband had passed away and she was sitting at home by herself, doing nothing, completely depressed, we put her in an assisted living home. And I've been following her for 2 years now. Her memory still slips. It's still getting worse. Everything else is actually maintained pretty well. She's one of the happiest people I've ever met. Comes in and sees me all the time, remembers who I am, which I'm not sure if that's due to trauma from testing with me or something else. But she is just doing amazing, and she's staying physically active and socially active and cognitively active to what she can do. And she has her little, what she calls her Charlie horse, which is her walker, and she goes about life and does what she needs to. And that's why I say what we find out is doing these things really, really help. The very last one, the hardest one, and this is where I get really concerned when we test people. I really don't like people falling. I don't like them falling, period. I get a lot of people sent over from the ER for concussions. Research has shown us that there's a higher propensity for dementia in any adult that has a moderate to severe concussion, like 4.5 times higher, right? So when we go and we smack our head and go, I just got knocked silly, and maybe got knocked out for a second, especially if you lose consciousness, we're actually seeing that it's leading to bigger issues. And we think the reason is because people don't go to their doctor for it. They just I kind of feel better, and they run about and do their life. The problem is how you feel and what your brain are doing are two very different playing fields. Treatment options. This is where it gets really hard, because this is the one that everyone asks me, right? What can we do about it? I'm going to be honest with you. There's not a lot we can do if you have certain types of dementia. Do we use medications like I got asked? Yeah, we do have medications. Currently, the research shows that Aricept is the best thing that we can use for early stage Alzheimer's. And then once it gets to the moderate or severe, we kind of switch over to Namenda. The thing about those medications are, it's not that they're bad, but we have to appreciate what they do. Their job is not to stop dementia. It's not to slow it. It's not to make life better. It masks the symptoms and improves some clarity while they still go through the dementia process. Current research is suggesting we get about 12 months to 18 months before it really doesn't work anymore. Now, sometimes it's still important to use that, but I also try to educate patients on what are we actually getting? What is our goal here? If someone comes in and they're 95 years old and we think they have dementia, I'm like, do we really want to put them on meds? It's kind of like saying, I'm 95 years old and I found out I have cancer. Do I really want to do chemotherapy? And those are decisions that we have serious discussions about, again, to maintain that dignity for the individual. Like it says, certain mental exercises can help with dementia, can speed up certain aspects, like maybe my ability to think faster, but it doesn't stop me from having it. Now, here's my favorite part. This is the part that I could spend, actually, that's not true. The whole thing I could spend days nerding out on. I think the brain's a beautiful thing. I love it. That might be why I have pictures of it all over my office and little models of it and little squishy brains and everything. I love the brain. I think it's amazing, but I love the research that we're doing. Here's what some of the things we're finding out. So we talked earlier about cardiovascular. This is something that we just barely figured out. Now, we knew cardiovascular was deeply connected to what we were seeing in vascular dementia, because obviously your heart pumps things around and you can have a stroke. But what we're starting to find out is that individuals that have had Alzheimer's, if they go and do an autopsy post-mortem, they're finding out that a vast majority of them appear to have cardiovascular disease also. Now, we're not 100% sure yet what that means. We're still researching it. But what we are suggesting is that perhaps there's a correlation, so the healthier we live, the better chance we may have of either not getting it or slowing the chances of getting it or having it worse. There appears to be a strong link between future risks of Alzheimer's and serious head trauma. We kind of talked about that. I had to put this one in because I spend a lot of time trying to explain to people that if they had a concussion, they really need to come see me, because I'm the brain nerd. I'm the one that likes to see how it's working. And then on drugs. Currently, there's 5 FDA-approved drugs, okay, to treat the symptoms. And currently, that's all we can do. Okay, but currently there's 9 major studies internationally that are being supported to either treat or hopefully prevent. And some of it's on the genetic level, and it's really amazing stuff. It's kind of boring if you don't like reading that type of research. I like it. Maybe I shouldn't like it so much. I'm sure my wife's got a list of things I could do instead of nerding out on research. Well, it was a pleasure, you all. This is the big fat, this is all about me because, I don't know, I needed to. This is my contact information, but out on the table is also some business cards. If you have any questions or needs, you're always welcome to get a hold of me. You guys are awesome. Thanks for coming. I'm overwhelmed.